You've felt this your whole life, even if you've never named it. That sense that everyone else got the manual for adulthood and you're still pretending. You watch people your age buy houses, have kids, build careers, make decisions with confidence. And you feel like you're playing dress up, like you're wearing responsibilities that don't quite fit. Like any moment someone's going to realize you're just a child in adult clothes, that you have no idea what you're doing. Psychology calls it immaturity, failure to launch, arrested development. Jung called it the Puer Aeternus, the eternal child, and it exists for a reason. Because you didn't fail to grow up, you were prevented from growing up, not by laziness, not by weakness, but by a childhood that demanded you stay young to survive. And now, you're stuck, not because you're broken, but because the pattern that kept you safe is now keeping you small. Before we go deeper, you need to understand something. The Puer Aeternus isn't a diagnosis, it's an archetype, one of the oldest patterns in human psychology. In mythology, the eternal child appears everywhere. Peter Pan who refuses to grow up, the divine child who stays innocent while the world burns, Icarus who flies too close to the sun because he hasn't learned consequences yet. These aren't just stories, they're psychological patterns that repeat across cultures, across time, because they represent something fundamental about the human psyche. The part of us that wants to stay in potential, in possibility, in the space before choices become permanent and freedom becomes responsibility. Jung studied this pattern his entire life, and he understood that the pure isn't about age. You can be 50 years old and still operating from this archetype, still avoiding commitment, still chasing the next thing, still refusing to land anywhere because landing means the game is over. But here's what most people miss. The pure isn't just someone who won't grow up, it's someone who can't grow up, because somewhere in their history, growing up meant danger, meant loss, meant betraying the only version of themselves that was ever allowed to exist. Let me show you exactly how this pattern gets installed, because it doesn't happen overnight. It happens through 1,000 moments where adulthood was made unbearable and childhood became your only safe place. Maybe you had a parent who was fragile, depressed, unstable, and you learned early that if you grew up, if you became independent, they would collapse, so you stayed young, you stayed small, you stayed needy, not because you wanted to, but because your development felt like abandonment, and you couldn't survive being the reason they fell apart. Or maybe you had a parent who lived through you, who needed you to be special, talented, full of potential, and the moment you started making real choices, adult choices that limited your options, they panicked. Don't close any doors, don't settle, you can be anything. So you stayed in the realm of possibility, because actualizing one path meant disappointing the parent who needed you to stay infinite. Or maybe you grew up in chaos, abuse, neglect, instability, and childhood wasn't safe, but adulthood was even more terrifying, because adulthood meant no one was coming to save you. It meant you were alone, responsible, and you weren't ready, so you froze. You stayed in the child position, not because you were immature, but because the alternative, facing the world as a vulnerable adult with no support, felt like death. Or maybe your family worshipped youth, beauty, potential, and aging meant irrelevance. So you internalized the belief that growing up meant becoming boring, becoming ordinary, becoming the people you swore you'd never be. And staying young became rebellion, became identity, became the only way to stay special. Any of this landing, because this isn't about one traumatic event, it's about an environment, a family system, a set of invisible rules that made growing up feel like betrayal, failure, or annihilation. And you adapted, you stayed young, not in body, but in psyche and decision-making, in the way you relate to time, commitment, and consequence. And everyone told you to just grow up, to be responsible, to get it together. But they didn't understand. You weren't refusing. You were protecting yourself from something they couldn't see. So what does the Puer Aeternus actually look like in adulthood? How do you know if this is your pattern? First, you feel like an impostor in your own life. You're 35, 40, 50 years old, and you still feel like a kid pretending to be an adult. You go to work, you pay bills, you do all the things adults do. But inside, you feel like you're faking it, like someone's going to call you out, expose you, send you back to the kids' table where you belong. And it's not low self-esteem, it's deeper than that. It's a fundamental disconnection from adult identity. You can't inhabit the role, you're always watching yourself play it, and it's exhausting. Second, you struggle with commitment, jobs, relationships, cities. You keep your options open. You don't fully invest in anything because investment feels like entrapment. You tell yourself you're being strategic, keeping possibilities alive, but really, you're terrified of choosing. Because choosing one thing means killing all the other versions of yourself, and you've built your entire identity on potential. So you stay in jobs you've outgrown because quitting means deciding what's next. You stay in relationships that aren't quite right because leaving means being alone. Or worse, you leave constantly, always chasing the next thing, the next person, the next city, the next version of yourself that will finally feel real. Third, you have a complicated relationship with authority. You either submit completely, letting others make decisions for you because you don't trust yourself, or you rebel against every structure, every rule, every boundary. Because authority figures represent the adult world, and you're not part of that world, you're outside it, above it, or beneath it, but never in it. Fourth, you romanticize your potential. You tell yourself and others that you could do anything if you really tried. You could write that book, start that business, learn that skill, but you don't, because as long as it stays potential, it stays perfect. The moment you actualize it, it becomes real, limited, imperfect, and you can't handle your dreams becoming ordinary. Fifth, you're exhausted because living in potential is exhausting, never landing anywhere, never committing to anything, always keeping one foot out the door. It's not freedom, it's paralysis. And deep down you know it, but you don't know how to stop. And the worst part, people judge you, they call you lazy, immature, self-indulgent, they tell you to grow up, to get your life together, to stop wasting time. But they don't see what you're carrying, they don't see that growing up doesn't feel like an option, it feels like death. And maybe this is the first time anyone has named it without contempt, not as a flaw you need to fix, but as a pattern that made sense once, as a survival strategy that worked until it didn't. Now let's talk about what's hiding beneath all of this, because the Puer Aeternus has a shadow, and that shadow is the senex, the old man, the part of you that's terrified of growing old, of becoming irrelevant, of being ordinary. Jung understood that the Puer and the senex are two sides of the same coin. The eternal child exists because aging feels like annihilation, and the more you run from maturity, the more you reinforce the belief that adulthood equals death. So you see people your age who have settled into adult life, married, kids, mortgages, routine, and you feel a mix of contempt and envy. Contempt because they've given up, envy because they seem stable, grounded, real, and you're still floating. But here's the projection. What you're actually seeing in them is the version of yourself you refuse to become. The one who chose, who committed, who let go of infinite possibility to build something finite and real, and you can't stand it, because it reminds you of what you sacrificed to stay young. Jung explored how everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, and your irritation with boring adults is your shadow screaming, because the Puer doesn't hate the senex. The Puer is terrified of becoming the senex, of losing magic, of becoming the parent who killed your aliveness. And until you integrate this, until you stop running from adulthood and start asking why it feels so dangerous, you'll stay stuck, not because you can't grow up, but because you're convinced that growing up means dying. Here's what no one tells you about the Puer Aeternus. It doesn't just stagnate, it self-destructs. Because potential has a shelf life. At 25, being full of potential is charming. At 35, it's concerning. At 45, it's tragic, and you feel it. You feel time running out. You feel the gap between who you could have been and who you actually are widening, and it's unbearable. So you do one of three things. First, you double down, you chase the next big thing, the next relationship that will finally be the one, the next city that will finally feel like home, the next career that will finally make you feel real. You tell yourself the problem is external. If you just find the right situation, you'll be able to land, but you won't, because the problem isn't the situation, it's the pattern. Second, you collapse, you give up on potential altogether, you take a soul-crushing job, you settle for a relationship that deadens you, you move back home, you stop trying, and you tell yourself this is maturity, this is reality, but it's not. It's the Puer giving up because it thinks growing up means dying, so it chooses death and calls it responsibility. Third, you destroy yourself, addiction, recklessness, dangerous behavior, because if you can't stay young forever and you can't become the adult everyone expects, then maybe you just don't exist. The Puer at its darkest doesn't mature, it self-annihilates. And this is why Jung was so concerned with this archetype, because the Puer Aeternus isn't cute, it's not harmless. When left unconscious, it destroys lives, not through malice, through refusal, refusal to land, refusal to commit, refusal to become. What looks like dysfunction is often intelligence under pressure, but intelligence that never evolves becomes its own prison. So how do you integrate the Puer? How do you grow up without killing the part of you that knows how to dream, play, and stay alive? First, stop calling it immaturity. This isn't a character flaw, it's a survival pattern, and it made sense. At some point in your life, staying young kept you safe, protected you from something unbearable. You need to honor that, not shame it. So stop listening to people who tell you to just grow up. They don't understand, and their contempt will only deepen the pattern. What you need isn't judgment, it's curiosity. Why did growing up feel dangerous? What did adulthood represent? What were you protecting yourself from? Second, you'll eventually be asked to grieve your unlived lives. This is the hardest part, because the Puer stays in potential to avoid grief. As long as you could still be anything, you don't have to mourn the things you'll never be. But that's the trap. You can't move forward while carrying every possible version of yourself. So at some point you let them die. The musician you never became, the traveler you never were, the person who lived a completely different life. They're not coming back, and that's devastating, but it's also liberating. Because once you stop carrying all those ghosts, you can finally inhabit the one life you actually have. Third, find the adults who didn't die. This is crucial because you're not afraid of adulthood. You're afraid of a specific kind of adulthood, the kind that kills creativity, joy, aliveness, the kind that turns people into machines. But not all adults became that. Some grew up and stayed whole. Some made commitments without losing themselves. Some built structure without killing spontaneity. Find those people, study them, because they prove that maturity doesn't mean death, it means integration. Fourth, you'll be asked to commit to something, anything, not because it's perfect, not because it's your calling, but because commitment is the antidote to the pure. You don't figure out who you are by thinking about it. You figure it out by choosing, by building, by staying when it gets hard. And yes, choosing one thing means letting go of others. Yes, it means limits, but limits aren't prison. Limits are form, and without form you're just potential, floating, formless, never real. Fifth, learn to metabolize time. The pure exists outside of time, always young, always beginning, but you're not outside of time, you're in it, and it's passing. And that's not a tragedy, that's reality. So stop running from aging, stop fearing the lines on your face, stop panicking about being behind. You're not behind, you're exactly where the choices you've made have led you, and you can make different choices now, but only if you stop pretending time isn't real. Here's what Carl Jung understood that most people miss. Growing up doesn't mean killing the child, it means giving the child a structure to live in. The pure isn't your enemy, it's the part of you that dreams, that imagines, that believes in possibility, that refuses to accept that this is all there is. You don't want to kill that, you want to integrate it. And integration doesn't mean compromise, it doesn't mean settling, it doesn't mean becoming the dead adults you swore you'd never be. It means this: you let the child dream, and you let the adult build, you let the pure imagine the life, and you let the senex create the structure that makes it real. That's wholeness, that's what Jung called individuation. But you can't get there by staying in potential forever. You can't get there by refusing to choose. You can't get there by running from aging, from commitment, from the limits that make life real. You have to land, not because landing is giving up, but because landing is the only way to build something that lasts. And deep down, beneath all the fear, beneath all the resistance, that's what you want. Not to stay young forever, but to finally feel real. So stop running from adulthood, stop equating maturity with death, stop telling yourself that growing up means losing yourself. You didn't lose yourself when you stayed young, you lost yourself when you refused to become. And now it's time to reclaim both, the child who dreams and the adult who builds, not one or the other, both. That's integration, that's freedom. That's what it means to finally grow up without growing old. Jung explored how the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and you can't become who you are by staying who you were. You'll eventually be asked to choose, to commit, to let some versions of yourself die so the real one can finally live. That's not death, that's birth, and it's been waiting for you this whole time. And the next choice you make today, not someday, is where this pattern either ends or deepens. Not tomorrow, not when you're ready, the moment you close this video.